This was supposed to be a fresh start for my family, a retreat from the chaos of our old life. I glanced back at Jennifer, my wife, who smiled reassuringly. Beside her, Harris and Betty chatted animatedly, their youthful optimism a stark contrast to the tight knot forming in my stomach. "Can you believe we're finally here?" Betty exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. "No more city noise, just us and nature." "Nature and creepy things," Harris muttered under his breath, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Creepy things?" I raised an eyebrow at him. "Yeah, you know, like ghosts and stuff," he replied, half joking, half serious. "Ghosts aren't real, buddy," I said, trying to ease his worries. "Just think of it as an adventure." Jennifer chuckled softly. "Let's not scare him before we even unpack." As we unloaded the truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. I dismissed it as paranoia, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at me. Once inside, the cabin felt both inviting and oppressive. The wooden walls seemed to whisper secrets, and every creak of the floorboards echoed in the silence. I tried to ignore the chill that settled in my bones as I moved around, unpacking boxes while Jennifer set about organizing the kitchen. "Hey, Dad, check this out," Betty called from the living room, her voice breaking through my thoughts. I joined her, finding her standing beside an old fireplace. "What is it?" She pointed at a faded photograph hanging askew on the wall. "This place looks like it was a party spot once. Look at all those people." I squinted at the image, a group of young adults beaming at the camera, their faces frozen in time. "Yeah, looks like it had its share of fun." "Or trouble," Harris added, peering over my shoulder. "What if they all met some horrible fate?" "Now you're just being dramatic," I said, ruffling his hair. "Let's focus on making our own memories." That night, as we settled in for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The wind howled outside, and every rustle in the trees sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at Jennifer, her serene face illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the window. "Are you awake?" I whispered. "Barely," she replied, her voice a soft murmur. "What's on your mind?" "I don't know, I feel like we're not alone here." She chuckled lightly. "You're just adjusting to the new environment. It'll pass." As sleep finally claimed me, I was jolted awake by a loud crash. Heart racing, I bolted upright, instincts kicking in. "Did you hear that?" I hissed, glancing at Jennifer. "Yeah, I did," she whispered back, fear creeping into her voice. Harris stumbled into our room, his blonde hair tousled. "What was that?" "Stay here," I instructed, rising from bed. I crept toward the door, each step echoing in the quiet. The air felt heavier, as if charged with static. We found the source. A bookshelf had toppled over in the living room, its contents strewn across the floor. "Just a freak accident," I said, trying to calm my racing heart. "Nothing to worry about." But deep down, I sensed a presence, something lurking just beyond the edge of my perception. The following days passed in a blur of unpacking and exploring the surrounding forest. The kids found joy in the wilderness, their laughter ringing out as they played among the trees. Jennifer and I shared quiet moments, sipping coffee on the porch, but the eerie feeling refused to leave. One evening, as I walked the perimeter of our property, I stumbled upon a clearing where the moonlight pooled like silver. Something about it felt wrong. There was an uneasiness in the air, a chill that settled deep in my bones. "Dad, look!" Harris shouted, breaking my reverie. He stood at the edge of the clearing, pointing at something half buried in the dirt. I approached, dread curling in my stomach. It was a rusted metal ring, remnants of a long-forgotten campsite. "Probably just junk," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Or a sign," Harris muttered, glancing at me. "You know, like a warning." "Stop it," I snapped, more harshly than intended. "You're letting your imagination run wild." "Am I?" he shot back, his blue eyes narrowing. Days turned into weeks, and strange occurrences escalated. Objects would shift positions. Whispers echoed in the night, and shadows flitted just out of sight. One night, I awoke to find the silhouette of a woman standing at the foot of my bed. I blinked, and she vanished, leaving only a cold breeze in her wake. "Did you see her?" I gasped, shaking Jennifer awake. "Who?" she mumbled, groggy. "The woman. She was right there." "Stop it, Terry. You're just exhausted," she sighed, rolling over. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being hunted. I began to notice how Harris and Betty would share glances, a silent agreement to ignore the strangeness surrounding us. One night, after a particularly tense day, I decided to confront the kids. "Listen, I know you've both been feeling it too," I said, my voice firm. "This place is dark. We need to talk about it." Harris crossed his arms, his expression defiant. "What do you want us to say? That we're scared? It's just an old cabin in the woods." Betty chimed in, her voice steady. "Maybe it's just the adjustment, Dad. We'll get used to it." I shook my head, frustration boiling over. "No, it's not just that. We can't ignore the feeling that something is wrong here." That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the living room, the shadows flickering in the corners of my vision. The wind howled and I felt a chill run down my spine. Then came the whispers, soft at first, like a breeze brushing through the trees. "Help me." I froze, heart pounding. "Who's there?" The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Help me, find him." I stumbled back, the words echoing in my mind. I knew then that the ghost was real, and she was reaching out to me. The next day, I found Harris and Chris outside, throwing rocks into a nearby stream. "Hey, can I talk to you?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Chris smirked, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "What's up, old man?" "It's serious. I need to know if you've heard any stories about this place. Anything strange?" "Just the usual ghost stories," Chris shrugged. "You know, kids messing around." I felt an urge to tell him about the whispers, but something held me back. "What about Amber?" Chris's smirk faltered. "Who?" I took a breath, gathering my thoughts. "Amber, the girl who died here a few years ago. You know anything about it?" Chris's expression changed, his facade cracking. I don't know much. Just that she was on a camping trip and something went wrong." "What do you mean went wrong?" I pressed, my heart racing. He hesitated, his bravado fading. "Her boyfriend died. I heard it was an accident. They kicked a rock and it fell on him. She just vanished after that." A chill settled in my gut. "Do you think she's still here?" "Maybe," Chris admitted, a shiver running through him. "It's just a story, though. Ghosts aren't real, right?" I wanted to believe him, but the whispers grew louder each night, pulling me deeper into a darkness I didn't understand. That evening I decided to explore the clearing again, drawn by an unseen force. The moon hung bright overhead, illuminating the space where I'd found the metal ring. "Help me." The whisper brushed against my ear, sending chills racing down my spine. "Amber?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is that you?" The air thickened, and a figure began to materialize before me. A woman with long, flowing hair and pale skin, her eyes wide with sorrow. "Find him," she pleaded, her voice echoing like a distant memory. "He needs to be found." "Who, your boyfriend?" I stammered, fear gripping me. She nodded, the sadness in her eyes deepening. "Chris, he took him from me." Chris. The name crashed into me like a wave. I turned to run, but she reached out, her icy fingers brushing my arm. "Help me." I stumbled back, heart racing, and suddenly, the shadows around me thickened, swirling like a storm. I could feel her rage and sorrow, a tempest of emotions crashing over me. "Get away from my family!" I shouted, my voice echoing into the darkness. The pressure released and she vanished, leaving me gasping for breath. I raced back to the cabin, fear coursing through my veins. "Jennifer!" I shouted, bursting through the door. "What happened?" she asked, her eyes wide with alarm. "Amber, she's real. She wants me to help her find Chris." "Who's Chris?" "The boy who—" I couldn't finish, panic rising in my chest. "We need to get out of here." The kids, startled, rushed into the room. "What's going on, Dad?" Harris asked, worry etched on his face. "We're leaving," I said, my voice firm. "Why?" Betty protested. "We just got here. Because this place is cursed." I snapped, frustration boiling over. "A ghost is haunting us and she's tied to Chris. We can't stay here." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Maybe we should listen to Dad," Harris said, his voice small. Jennifer stepped forward, her expression softening. "Let's just take a breath. We need to think this through." But I couldn't think. All I could hear were Amber's whispers, echoing in my mind. I turned to the kids. "You need to trust me. We can't ignore this." After a tense silence, Betty finally spoke. "What do we do?" "We find Chris," I said, determination flooding my veins. "We find him and make things right, or we'll never be free of her." That night, I confronted Chris, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached, he looked up from the fire with a cocky grin. What's up, old man? Chris, we need to talk. He smirked, tossing a stick into the flames. What about? I know what happened to Amber, I said, my voice steady. And you need to take responsibility. Thank you. She whispered, her voice softer now. Thank you for helping me. Is he gone? I asked, my heart racing. He is at peace now, she replied, her eyes glimmering with unshed tears. Will you leave us? Chris asked, his voice trembling. I will find my way, she said, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. But know this, your actions have consequences. Remember that. With those words she began to fade, the air around us growing lighter. The whispers receded, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Chris and I exchanged a glance, the weight of our actions settling heavily between us. I'm sorry, he murmured, guilt etched on his face. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I nodded, understanding the burden he carried. Let's make sure it doesn't happen again. As we made our way back to the cabin, the forest felt different, less oppressive, more alive. The weight of Amber's presence had lifted, replaced by a sense of freedom. Jennifer and the kids were waiting, concern etched on their faces. What happened? Jennifer asked, her voice filled with worry. We found her, I said, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. She's at peace now. Thank goodness, Betty whispered, her eyes wide. As we packed up our things, preparing to leave the cabin behind, I felt a sense of closure settle over me. We had faced the darkness and emerged on the other side. I'm sorry for dragging you into all of this, I said to Chris, who stood at the edge of the property, lost in thought. He shrugged, a hint of a smile on his lips. It's okay. I needed to face it. As we drove back to town, I glanced at my family in the rearview mirror. Their faces illuminated by the fading light. Do you think we'll ever come back? Betty asked, her voice hopeful. Maybe one day, I replied, but deep down, I knew that some places were best left in the past. With a promise in my heart, I vowed to protect my family from the darkness that lingered in the shadows. The forest was beautiful, but it held secrets that could never be forgotten. And as I glanced back one last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that Amber was watching over us, no longer a vengeful spirit, but a guardian of the woods, forever entwined with the memories we had shared. This place had always felt like home to me, a sanctuary where I could escape the noise of the world. But lately something was off. I grabbed my gear, including the small camera I intended to set up. The new wolf pack had been causing a stir. Livestock was disappearing, and the townsfolk were growing restless. I needed to understand what was going on before they took matters into their own hands. With a few clicks, I set the camera in a tree, angling it toward a worn path I'd seen the wolves use. As I stepped back, I heard a rustle in the underbrush. My heart raced, but when I turned, nothing was there, just the wind whispering through the branches. I shook it off and drove back to town, the unease settling in my gut. The diner was buzzing with patrons as I walked in. They paused, eyes narrowing, whispers trailing behind me like shadows. Look who's back, one of them sneered. Mr. Nature Boy. Just doing my job, I replied, taking a seat at the counter. You mean your hobby? Another voice chimed in, laughter echoing in the cramped space. I ignored them, focusing on my coffee. The scent of bacon and grease filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension that hung around me. What's going on with the wolves? I finally asked the group. The sheriff says we should take them out. A burly man replied, slamming his fist on the table. They're dangerous. Dangerous? I scoffed. They're just animals trying to survive. Not when they're hunting our livestock. We've lost too much already, the man shot back, his voice rising. I knew I had to act quickly. If the townsfolk decided to hunt the wolves, it could lead to a massacre. I stood up, leaving a few crumpled bills on the counter. Where are you going? Someone called after me. To find the truth, I muttered, stepping outside into the cool night. Back at my cabin, I plugged the camera into my laptop, anticipation racing through me. The screen flickered and I leaned closer. What I saw sent chills down my spine. The video showed the sheriff transforming under the light of the full moon, his body contorting as fur sprouted from his skin. No way, I whispered, disbelief washing over me. I had to tell someone. The townsfolk needed to know the truth. As I grabbed my keys, I heard a noise outside, a low growl followed by a rustling sound. I paused, my heart pounding, but I forced myself to step out. The night was silent again, but unease crept in like fog. I hurried to my truck, my mind racing. The sheriff was one of them. He was a werewolf, and if the pack was anything like him, the danger was greater than I'd imagined. The engine roared to life and I sped through the town, the street lamps flickering overhead. I had to get to the diner to rally the townsfolk with proof. Suddenly a figure stepped into the road. It was Deputy Harris, arms crossed, blocking my path. "Hold it right there, Donald," he said, his voice low and steady. "Get out of the way, Harris," I shouted, my grip tightening on the wheel. He approached slowly, almost casually, as if he didn't have a care in the world. "I think you need to step out of the vehicle," he insisted, and I could see the glint of something in his eyes. I hesitated, then swung the door open. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. "Because you're a problem," he said, pulling the camera from my hands. "Hey, you can't—" Before I could finish, he pressed a button and the screen went black. "Don't worry, no one will believe you now." His eyes met mine and I felt the blood drain from my face. He was one of them too. "Get back in your truck, Donald," he ordered, a smirk creeping onto his lips. I opened my mouth to scream, but the laughter of the townsfolk echoed around me. They had gathered, watching the scene unfold, and all I could hear were their mocking chuckles. "Crazy Donald, scared of his own shadow," someone jeered. "Leave him alone," I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat, but they only laughed harder. "Time to go," Harris said, his tone final. I climbed back into the truck, heart racing, and sped out of town. Panic coursed through my veins. I had to gather a team, someone who would believe me. The next morning, I reached out to some old friends from the military, seasoned hunters who knew how to face the impossible. When I explained the situation, some laughed, others showed concern, but I convinced a few to join me. We met at a rundown bar on the edge of town, a place where the locals wouldn't bother us. "Werewolves, really?" One of them snorted, shaking his head. "Look, I know it sounds crazy, but I've seen it," I insisted, my voice firm. "We can't let them kill more innocent animals, or worse." As the sun set, we drove back toward the town, the air thick with tension. "I still think this is a joke," one hunter muttered. But the others were silent, watching the road. When we arrived, the streets were eerily quiet. The diner's lights flickered, but no one was inside. "Something's not right," I said, scanning the area. Then we saw it, the blood. It was smeared across the pavement, trails leading into the shadows. "Holy hell," one of the hunters whispered. "Let's find a safe place," I urged. We ducked into an abandoned warehouse, the air stale and thick with dust. "Do we really think we can take them on?" one of my friends questioned, doubt creeping into his voice. "It's either us or them," I replied, determination fueling my words. We set up a perimeter, placing traps and weapons around the building. Adrenaline surging through us. As darkness fell, the howls echoed through the night, chilling, primal and hungry. "They're coming," I warned, gripping my rifle tightly. The first wave hit like a storm. The door burst open and chaos ensued. "Watch out!" someone screamed as a dark shape lunged at us. I fired, the shot ringing through the air, followed by a howl of pain. "Get back!" I shouted, trying to rally my team, but the wolves were relentless, their eyes glowing with hunger. We fought back, but one by one my friends fell, taken by the beasts. The stench of blood filled the air, mingling with the screams and growls. "Donald, help!" one of them cried as he was dragged into the darkness. I pressed on, my heart pounding, but desperation clawed at me. I couldn't let their sacrifice be in vain. Finally, it was just me. I stumbled back, gasping for breath. The warehouse now silent except for the distant howls. I was alone. I had survived, but at what cost? Sinking to the ground, I felt the weight of the night pressing down on me. I had come to protect the town, to save the wolves, but instead, I had witnessed the horror hidden beneath the surface. As the first light broke over the horizon, I stood up, adrenaline fading into exhaustion. I had to leave this place behind, to forget the laughter that had mocked me, the blood that had stained the streets. I walked out of the warehouse, the sun casting long shadows as I made my way to my truck. The town was empty, a ghost of what it had once been. With one last glance at the forest, I drove away, the memories haunting me like the howls in the night. Surviving was all that mattered now.
The storm roared like a wild beast, waves crashing against the hull of the Esperanza, with a force that rattled the luxury ship to its core. Inside the grand dining hall, Laughter momentarily masked the chaos outside. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a glass of wine glimmering in the candlelight. "Did you hear about the couple who thought they could outrun the storm?" Charlie laughed, his voice booming over the clinking of cutlery. "Yeah, they ended up in the next state," Michael chimed in, slapping the table. The laughter echoed, but it was abruptly cut off as the ship lurched violently. The lights flickered, then went out. "Whoa!" Paul yelled, grabbing onto the table for support as the ship pitched again. "Everyone, stay calm." Hannah's voice rose above the din, but the panic was palpable. The storm howled outside, a banshee wailing, and the Esperanza creaked ominously. "Not much of a vacation, huh?" Donald muttered, his voice tinged with dread. "More like a nightmare," Tiffany added, her eyes wide. Suddenly, a thunderous crack sounded as the ship's hull buckled under the strain. Water began to pour in and screams filled the air. "Man overboard!" Jennifer shouted as a wave crashed through the dining hall, sweeping away tables and chairs. Chaos erupted and the passengers scrambled for lifeboats, abandoning their meals in favor of survival. "Get to the deck," Marcus shouted, shoving through the crowd. Outside, the storm raged and the lifeboats were already half filled. Screams mingled with the wind as people fought for their lives. The ship listed dangerously, water swallowing it inch by inch. "Cyprian, help!" Helga cried as she struggled to keep her footing. Marcus turned back, grabbing her arm. "This way." But just as they made it to the edge of the deck, a monstrous wave crashed over the ship, sending them tumbling into the icy sea. When Marcus woke, sunlight streamed through the trees, dappling his face. Groaning, he pushed himself up from the sand, disoriented. "Hello?" he called, his voice hoarse. "Is anyone there?" "Over here." A familiar voice rang out. He stumbled towards the sound, heart racing. A group of survivors huddled together, some nursing wounds, others simply in shock. "Thank God," Charlie exclaimed, rushing forward. "We thought we were the only ones." "Where's everyone else?" Marcus asked, scanning the beach. "Don't know," Michael replied, his face pale. "We were separated. There were so many." As the reality of their situation sank in, the survivors began to gather. They were far from the chaos of the ship, washed ashore on a seemingly idyllic island. The golden sands and azure waters were deceiving, hiding the horrors they had just escaped. Days turned into weeks. They set up makeshift shelters of palm fronds and driftwood, and laughter slowly returned to the group as they scavenged for food and built a life together. "This place isn't so bad," Paul said one afternoon, sipping coconut water. "Yeah, if it weren't for the whole being lost at sea part." Zara chuckled, tossing a piece of fruit to Dimitri. "Or the possibility of cannibals lurking around," Jonathan joked, earning a chorus of laughter. 1 month passed, and the survivors had transformed the beach into a community. They constructed cabins, planted gardens, and even tamed a few wild animals. "Look at this," Anna called, holding up a handful of berries. "We might survive forever here. Or we might starve," Tiffany shot back, though she smiled. But just as they began to feel at home, a shadow loomed over their newfound paradise. The hunting party returned one evening, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. "Marcus," Charlie gasped, stumbling into the clearing. "They took him." "Who took him?" Helga asked, her voice shaking. "The cannibals," Michael replied, breathless. "We saw them. They were hunting us." The group fell silent, the air heavy with dread. "Cannibals?" Jennifer whispered, eyes darting around as if expecting a spear to pierce the night. "Yes," Charlie said, his voice low. "They shot arrows at us. We barely got away. What do we do now?" Anna asked, her hands trembling. "We prepare for battle," Paul stated firmly, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. As night fell, the survivors gathered around a fire, strategizing in hushed tones. The flickering flames cast long shadows and the tension was palpable. "I can't believe this is happening," Rodriguez muttered, shaking his head. "First, we need to find Marcus," Otto replied. "He could be in danger." "But what if they're waiting for us?" Tiffany asked. "Then we'll be ready," Donald said, his jaw set with determination. They spent the night fortifying their camp, making weapons from sharpened sticks and fallen branches. "Here's hoping we don't end up as the main course," Zara quipped, trying to lighten the mood. But laughter was rare as sleep evaded them. The thought of Marcus held captive, weighing heavily on their minds. The next day dawned bright and clear, the island's beauty a stark contrast to the dread lingering in their hearts. They set out to find Marcus, armed with their makeshift weapons and a sense of resolve. "Stay close," Michael instructed, leading the way through the dense underbrush. The jungle was alive with sounds, chirping birds, rustling leaves, and the distant call of an unknown creature. "Do you think they're really cannibals?" Jennifer whispered, shuddering. "Probably just a rumor," Charlie said, but his voice lacked conviction. As they ventured deeper into the jungle, the atmosphere shifted. Shadows loomed and the air grew thick with tension. Suddenly, a rustle in the bushes sent them into a defensive stance. "Get ready," Paul hissed, gripping his spear tightly. A figure emerged and they all froze, hearts pounding. It was a man, wild-eyed and disheveled, but alive. "Help me," he gasped, collapsing before them. "Who are you?" Anna demanded, kneeling beside him. "Please," he begged, "they're coming." "The cannibals." "Where's Marcus?" Michael asked urgently. "They took him to their camp," the man stammered. "I barely escaped." "Lead us," Donald commanded, and the man nodded, rising unsteadily. They followed him through the jungle, adrenaline coursing through their veins. With every step, the fear of what awaited them grew heavier. Finally, they reached a clearing. And there it was, a crude settlement. Primitive huts nestled among the trees. "There," the man pointed, trembling. Marcus was tied to a post, unconscious, while figures danced around a fire, chanting in a language they couldn't understand. "We have to act fast," Charlie whispered, eyes narrowing. "On 3, Paul said, counting down. With a battle cry, they charged into the clearing, weapons drawn. "Get him!" Anna shouted, pointing toward Marcus as the cannibals turned in shock. Chaos erupted. Arrows whizzed past, and the survivors fought with fierce determination. "Marcus!" Michael yelled, dodging a spear. But just as they reached him, the cannibals retaliated, and the situation spiraled. "Run!" Donald yelled, grabbing Marcus as the others covered their retreat. They stumbled back into the jungle, heartbeats thundering in their ears. "Keep going," Helga urged, glancing back at the pursuing cannibals. But as they raced through the thick underbrush, they heard the unmistakable sound of an engine, a boat on the horizon. "Look!" Tiffany shouted, pointing to the sea. A ship was approaching, and with it came hope. "Over here!" Michael waved frantically, but the cannibals were closing in. "Keep running!" Paul urged, shoving Marcus forward. The ship drew closer, the crew spotting the chaos on the shore. "Help!" Marcus shouted, his voice hoarse but desperate. The cannibals hurled arrows, and one grazed Michael's arm. "Go, go!" he yelled, pushing everyone toward the water. Just as they reached the shoreline, the ship dropped a lifeboat, and the crew scrambled to their aid. "Get in!" the captain shouted, his voice slicing through the chaos. They clambered aboard, panting and bloodied as arrows whizzed past them. "Pull away!" the captain ordered, and the lifeboat sped toward the ship, leaving the island behind. As the waves crashed against the hull, the survivors looked back at the island, once a paradise, now a nightmare. "Is everyone here?" Jennifer asked, counting heads. "Just about," Otto replied, his eyes scanning the group. "But what about the others?" "We'll bring them back," the captain assured, his expression grim. And as the ship sailed into the horizon, the survivors clung to hope, the taste of freedom bittersweet on their lips. Weeks later, they stood on solid ground, the world returning to its familiar chaos. News reports of the storm and the missing Esperanza flooded the airwaves. But the survivors knew a truth far deeper than what the world would say. "I can't believe we made it," Zara said softly, looking out at the sea. "Yeah," Marcus replied, rubbing his wrists where the ropes had chafed. "But those memories, they'll never fade. Maybe we can turn this into something good," Anna suggested, a spark of determination in her eyes. "Yeah," Paul agreed, glancing around at everyone. "We survived, and we can help others, too." The group nodded, a shared understanding passing between them. The island had taken so much, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond among them. "Together," Charlie said, raising a fist. "Together," they echoed, the spirit of survival igniting their hearts once more. Though their journey had been marred by darkness, the flicker of hope remained. Stories of resilience were yet to be written.